Hello and welcome to Learn to Speak Chinese, Tape 1. Or should I say, Ni Hao. Try to say, Ni Hao. Nintendo has remained a Japanese-owned company for over a century. Nearly every game they make, Japan had a strong influence in its development. Because Japan is Nintendo's home country, many of the games and merchandise never leave the country. Please give us Mother 3! I'm making plain that Nintendo denies us Americans a handful of stuff, but in reality, I'm very fortunate. America gets most of the Japanese games and even a few exclusive games ourselves. It's quite hard for Nintendo fans that don't reside in Japan or America. Europe missed tons of Super Nintendo games, especially RPGs like Final Fantasy III, Chrono Trigger, Secrets of Mana, Mario RPG, and Earthbound. Australia missed out on a lot of GameCube games like Harvest Moon and Mega Man Anniversary Collection, and South Korea never even got the Wii U. With how little effort Nintendo makes into other regions, it's quite shocking knowing Nintendo made an exclusive console for a country where home consoles were illegal. If you couldn't guess by the title and the intro, the country I was referring to is, of course, China. China has a long, complicated history of video game laws. Before we get into it, I'm going to be talking a lot about China and the country's laws, but I'm not here to say anything about China itself and whether its policies are good or bad. I'm not smart enough to give detailed critiques of laws for a country I'm not very familiar with. If you want political takes on China, this is the wrong place. I'm just here to talk about Dr. Mario. So, China was never, and still isn't that into Nintendo games. The Famicom and its games were seen as too expensive to the average citizen. A lot of people in the country would go on to play the Famicom's library through knockoffs and bootlegs. And these bootlegs were popular and did well. The Chinese computer called Super, or Little Tyrant, featured unofficial emulated versions of Famicom games and sometimes Super Famicom games. And these computers were so popular that they had commercials with Jackie Chan. Despite having games, these Little Tyrant computers were often marketed more as educational devices than game consoles. That's something you'll see going forward. Most video game consoles are often marketed as something else. Yeah, man, that's not a video game console. That's a plate. But why were they marketed as such? Well, due to rising concerns of video game addiction, from the years 2000 to 2015, it became illegal to produce, import, buy, and sell video game consoles and arcade machines. Kind of. This temporary ban is why most gamers in China play games on their PCs, because games are not a PC's only use. Bootleg Famicom games would still pop up here and there, especially in the black market. I would love to meet the guy who got a life sentence for buying Wrecking Crew. But the funny thing about the law is that there was quite a bit of wiggle room. With a little bit of creativity, you could probably dance around whatever rules you wanted. The law's biggest oversight is that the law never specified what a video game console was. And remember, it banned consoles, but technically a video game handheld is something different. Using these loopholes, Nintendo came up with the idea to get their games in the hands of people living in China. Nintendo teamed up with Wei Yan to make a regional exclusive video game device, and thus was born the iQue player. Now, what is the iQue player? This was a video game controller that could connect to the TV to play games, so it technically qualified as a handheld and was thus legal. The console was released in 2003, but despite the GameCube being released in most regions, the iQue player could only play N64 games. The game came pre-downloaded with Dr. Mario 64, but had timed demos for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Mario 64, Star Fox 64, and Wave Race 64. You could get more games, but they didn't come in cartridges. To get more games, you would take a memory card to a thing called an iQue depot, where you could purchase and download games to your memory card that once inserted into the controller, you could play. These depots would be available in various places, mainly gas stations, but I couldn't find any at Buc-ee's. This memory card format was used both because it made it look less like a game console and it would help prevent piracy. Later in the iQue's life, you could buy and download games from the internet in the comfort of your own home. That is actually really cool because this was before the Wii Shop channel and the DSi shop, so this was the first time Nintendo offered online purchases for their hardware. While you could only save a limited number of games to your memory card at a time, allegedly if you deleted a game from your card you purchased, you could later download it again for free. There were 14 games released for the iQue player's short lifespan. The library consists of Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Paper Mario, Dr. Mario 64, Yoshi's Story, Super Smash Bros., The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Star Fox 64, F-Zero X, Wave Race 64, Excite Bike 64, Sin and Punishment, Custom Robo, and Animal Crossing. Yeah, if you didn't know, Animal Crossing was originally released on the N64 in Japan, but was re-released on the GameCube in America and even later in Japan. That's why the game looks like that. A screenshot of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask was on the back of the box, but was never released on that platform. Speculation on why the game never came to the platform ranged from the game's dark subject matter, to the iQue's short lifespan, to the fact that the game used the N64 expansion pack. All the games were translated into Mandarin. There was also a traditional Chinese translation of Ocarina of Time, but it never came out. I should clarify, only the written text was translated. Voice clips like Mario 64's remain intact. There are other small edits to the games, like fixing some glitches and faster load times. These faster load times make these versions of the games prime for speedrunning. Sometimes there are missing features such as Rumble Pack functionality. There was an accessory for multiplayer. Nintendo even had plans for online multiplayer, but it was never finished. The iQue player unfortunately was not a big success. The last game to be released on the platform was Animal Crossing in 2006, which was 3 years after the iQue player came out. But at least the online store was functional all the way up to 2018. The thing now just exists as a collector's piece. A very expensive collector's piece. Nintendo did show interest in bringing the Wii to China, but either because of China's restrictions or just Nintendo losing interest, it never came to fruition. The Wii did end up being a popular Chinese black market item, but Nintendo's journey for a Chinese market didn't end there. Nintendo reused the iQue branding when they brought over the Game Boy Advance to the region. Since it was a handheld, there were nowhere near as many hoops to jump through. This didn't go well, with only 8 games being available for the platform. There were around 12 other games planned for the platform that never came out. There was an iQue DS with only 6 games. Surprisingly, the iQue DS can play DS games from any region, so if you can get your hands on a different country's cartridge and can speak another language, you can play it. I don't know if that's legal though, but you can do it. As you could have guessed, there was later an iQue 3DS using the 3DS XL model. Games for the system include Super Mario 3D Land, Mario Kart 7, and that's it. That's all of them. There were 2 games available for the handheld. There wasn't even an eShop in the country. That was it. In July of 2015, China's ban on production and selling video game consoles was lifted, and PlayStation and Xbox jumped at the chance to bring their consoles over there. When Nintendo's investors asked if there were any plans to bring the Wii U to China, the late Nintendo president Satoru Iwata responded that while interested in developing an audience in China, they were not planning on bringing the Wii U to the country, and even suggested making a whole new console similar to the iQue player. A lot of people found this baffling, but the more I thought about it, the more it made complete sense. First off, this was the later half of the Wii U. Not only was the next system coming out soon, but the Wii U was also a complete commercial failure. If a DS couldn't succeed in China, imagine how horribly a Wii U would sell. Also, just because the ban was lifted, that doesn't mean everyone living in China were frothing at the mouth to finally get their hands on consoles. Most citizens were content with PC or mobile gaming. While I can say not bringing over the Wii U was a smart choice in retrospect, I can't see why they wanted to make a new exclusive console for that region. Well, no such thing ever came to fruition. Good, because an iQue player Wii U sounds so stupid that I would stop at nothing to have it. Once the Nintendo Switch had proved itself to be a success, Nintendo partnered with the company Tencent to release the system in China in 2019. The Switches released in the country were specifically region-locked to only allow games the government approved of. The Switch hasn't really been a huge success in the country. It's done way better than any of the other iQue branded stuff, but that's not saying much. But while that's all I can say about Nintendo's hardware in China, that's not all their software. When choosing a chipset for the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo ended up choosing Nvidia. With this close bond, Nintendo agreed to bring over a handful of their games to the Nvidia Shield line of microconsoles. Yeah, Nintendo, the company that would rather go bankrupt than ever see one of their games on a rival platform, agreed to bring some of their most beloved games to some random console. To be fair, these ports were only available in China, so that probably made it sting a lot less, but still. The games include Super Mario Galaxy, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, Mario Kart Wii, Donkey Kong Country Returns, Punch-Out, the Wii one, and The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Despite all the other games being from the Wii and having a popular Wii port, Twilight Princess was the GameCube version. But these weren't simple ports. All the games are now in HD, 60 frames per second, and replaced any motion controls with standard button controls. The emulator Nintendo used was praised by reviews, stating that it was better than the unofficial emulator Dolphin. That's some high praise. I've heard the Super Mario 3D All-Stars version of Mario Galaxy was very similar to this version, but I don't know how true that is. The games were released in 2017, but have all been since discontinued. Surprisingly, these didn't sell well, selling a combined 22,761 units. That's around 3,793.5 downloads per game. If an HD 60 frames per second standard button controls version of any of these games launched on the Switch in America, they would most likely outsell the Nvidia versions in under 24 hours. With how little effort Nintendo and even other large video game companies put into bringing games and consoles to other countries, it's nice to see that they went through so much effort to bring their games into a country where it was very difficult to release games in. Yes, all of this was just for money, but the fact that people in China got a special official way to experience some of Nintendo's best games just warms my heart. The iQue player is such a fascinating oddity of game history and is a prized possession of any collector who has it. Even with the ban being pulled, China continues to have tricky laws when it comes to video games, so it's an uphill battle. Whether people living in China care about these games or not, Nintendo's efforts are still admirable. Please insert next tape. The Learn and Speak Chinese Tape 2. When does it teach me the word for Zelda?